there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today I have a review of the brand new Premier watercolors by Nicole. I was contacted by ACMoore about a month ago and they asked if I'd like to try out their new line of watercolors they were coming out with, and being familiar with a lot of the other Premier products at ACMoore, I said absolutely. If I can find a bargain for my fans, that is great, and they always run really good sales, so I was really thrilled to try them out. This isn't a sponsored video. If you run out and buy them all, I get nothing in return, you know, just to let you know, but they did send me these for free to review. So they sent me 15 different colors. They aren't necessarily the colors that I would have picked to do a review with, but they were an interesting assortment. And the first thing I did with them was I actually made a color mixing chart. I was actually just kind of binge watching TV and I thought it'd be kind of fun. So here you can see the mixes that I got. I think I left out two of the colors here just because they were kind of similar and I didn't have very much room on my paper. And actually, I have a really great tip for doing these charts. Before I showed you how you can do it with really skinny masking tape, but I hated the waste of the tape. Well, I used my Waffle Flowers swatch stamps and actually just stamped it a bunch of times and made my grid that way, and it kept it so much nicer and neater looking. So I just wanted to give you that tip because I know a lot of you guys have this stamp set. It's just another way you can use it, and it's a nice way to kind of see what the capabilities of your paints are. As of yet, these are only available from single tubes, and they're $3.99 a tube. So they may come out with sets in the future. It seems like a lot of times they do come out with sets to go with their single products, so maybe keep your eyes open for that. I don't know if they have plans to do that yet, but you know, a lot of times they do with their products. And they also have just opened up a store that you can order online, but these watercolors are not listed yet. But I wanted to let you know because I mentioned picking stuff up at ACMoore a lot, and a lot of you guys are not on the East Coast and you're bummed out that you're missing out on some things that you'd like to get. This is just a quick doodle that I did with those paints and the new brushes that they sent, because they've also released a line of watercolor brushes. I would almost call them more of like a watercolor or water media brush, because I think these would be really good for gouache and even acrylics. They're short-handled brush, so they're meant for sitting at a tabletop. They've got really good spring. They're I wouldn't call them stiff, but I wouldn't call them floppy. I would say they're kind of just your average golden taklon brush, and we're going to be doing a demo with these. And I did those with the brushes too, just so you can kind of get an idea. These range your price from $3.99 to $4.99. I probably would have picked the largest flat that they sold in the largest round, you know, just from my own preference, because I always believe in going with the biggest brush that you have. But this will definitely give you an idea of how these brushes perform, and that is the Premier Onyx brush. So these would be great if you also like to use gouache and acrylics, I think. And they also have a watercolor paper, which is also called Premier by Nicole. They've had this for a long time. It reminds me an awful lot of the Canson XL. It's called cold, actually I don't know if they call that cold press or not, but it is definitely a smoother paper than what I'm used to for cold press. Like the Canson XL, it has the same texture as the Canson XL. I think the Canson XL is just a smidgen whiter than the Premier. The Premier is like $5.88, and I think the Canson XL is regular price is like $10, but they go on sale. I don't know if you could pick it up on camera or not, but this is the Canson XL. It's just maybe a shade brighter, if that, but the texture is the same, very smooth, and it would be ideal if you rubber stamp and you like to watercolor your rubber stamped images, because this would take place of hot press watercolor paper or Bristol board for rubber stamping. And these examples were all done on their paper. So this was painted on their paper. This was done on the back side of their paper, which might have given me a little bit of streakiness, because I kind of messed up my chart. I was drawing a chart out and it was a hot mess. So I just had to find my stamps and see if that would work. And I did get a bit of streakiness, but sometimes the back sides of a watercolor paper just don't take the paint as well. Like maybe they only size one side, I don't know. Or it's just too smooth on the back, I'm not sure. And then here, I swatched out the watercolors and did one layer of glazing, and I also decided to compare it to some other paints that I have that they reminded me of. So let's look at this chart. I apologize for my furnace. It actually snowed a bit today, and it's only October, so it's kind of depressing. But here we go. We have the colors that I have in the Premier Nicole line, and this is on my regular swatching paper there, just so you you can see, this is so smooth that I was getting more of a streaky appearance on this paper, so that might be something you want to kind of keep your eye out. I think this paper is going to be much better for either more botanical stuff, where you're watering your paint down to thinner layers, or stamping and coloring, because if you get too thick with it, you can get a little streaky. That was fresh from the tube, and it was very streaky. Not very streaky, but you could definitely see the streaks. So when I had squeezed this out and it dried down, it looked to me an awful lot like Cotman watercolors from the tubes, which are another student grade paint made by Winsor & Newton. And so for fun, I had a plate that still had some Cotman colors on it, and I swatched out my Cotman tube colors. I also have a big swatch of the Cotman pan colors, which I'll grab towards the end of the video. Don't let me forget about that. And you know, they weren't as similar as I thought they would be. The permanent rose is quite similar. And then again, I also don't have all the same colors. The Prussian blue is very similar. The Payne's gray, I wouldn't call it an exact match, but it's pretty close. So it definitely reminded me of the Cotman colors more than any other color. But then I also decided, because they also kind of reminded me of the Royal Langnickel paints. And one thing that I dislike about these paints is there's no pigment information on here anywhere. And I did contact the company and asked about pigment information, and they didn't have it, but they said they'd try to get it for me. So that was kind of a bummer, because then you don't know if you've got a color that's got one pigment in it, or you've got a color that's got 3 or 4 pigments in it. And how vibrant your paint is going to be is heavily dependent on how many pigments they use. The fewer pigments, the better. Ideally, single pigment colors are going to give you the best mixes. And we'll go into that in just a second, because I think I found 3 colors that were single pigments and they mixed beautifully. And down here on the bottom, I actually grabbed my Royal Langnickel tubes and I swatched them out there. And I was actually surprised at how vibrant they were compared to the Cotman. I use Royal Langnickel tubes a lot for teaching, because then I can make really quick small custom palettes for people in class, because I also teach with a Cotman sketcher box, but sometimes I have more people show up, so I make little custom palettes with just the colors they need, and they always perform really well. And I was very impressed with how well the Royal Langnickel paints did. The caveat to the Royal Langnickel paints, though, is that they do have an odor to them. I actually smelled these paints to see if I could smell anything, and I couldn't, so I asked my husband to smell the paints when they were freshly squeezed, and he said he could smell something, but it wasn't strong. It definitely wasn't as strong as the Royal Langnickel. So if that bothers you, you would want to avoid the Royal Langnickel. The Premier, the Cotman, probably wouldn't bother you, because I mean, like, I could smell that there's some smell, but it's not, like, strong, like, and I have to have my nose, like, right on it, like I'm having, like, paint on my nose, because that's how close I'd have to be to smell anything. But the Royal Langnickel do have an odor to them. The Royal Langnickel are also quite a bit cheaper. You can get a big, like, set with brushes and tubes, large tubes of watercolor and palette and the storage case and stuff for 20 bucks, even right at ACMoore, right next to these paints. So they are quite a bit less money, but they do have an odor. So just kind of keep that in mind if, you know, you're trying to decide what to buy. Now the Cotman paints, they run around, I think full price in a store, probably between $3 to $4, maybe closer to $4. So they would be about the same price as the Premier paints. And that's another reason I thought, geez, they're awfully similar. I wonder if there's any sort of relationship between those two companies. And I don't know if there is or not, but they're definitely very similar. So if you enjoy the Cotman paints, you probably would enjoy the Premier paints as well. I might hang on until they have a sale, because I know with their oils and acrylics, they often do, you know, 3 for $10 or 4 for $10. So I bet they would run similar sales with the watercolors. Of course, don't hold me to that. I have no, like, inside information into the company or anything, but that's how a lot of their other products go. So here I swatched this on my regular paper just so I could kind of get a good idea for granulation and if it looks like it has a lot of fillers and extenders. I can see a little scaliness in the Prussian blue, but Prussian blue does have a slight granulation to it anyway. The raw sienna, I find the yellow ochre is much prettier than the raw sienna. The raw sienna almost wants to clump and streak a little bit, where the yellow ochre feels a lot more pure and just smoother and just more lovely. That's a color I use a lot. I really loved the permanent rose, which I would just about bet that's a single pigment PV19 paint. The cad yellow hue, which I'm not sure, it almost looks like a Hansa yellow to me, even though they call it cad yellow. I wouldn't be surprised if it was PY3, and the Intense Blue, which is your Phthalo Blue, which would be PB15. Those three colors, I would say they have they look like single pigments to me, and I would be very surprised if they have a lot of extenders or fillers. This is the mix that I did with this, which I thought was more impressive than the mix I did with all of these colors. So what I would recommend if you're curious about these paints is to go and pick out Permanent Rose, the Cad Yellow Hue, and Intense Blue, and do some mixing. So you could see the beautiful violet that I got between the blue and the pink, the gorgeous green that I got between the yellow and the blue, and the beautiful neutral I got here with all three. And then I started mixing my neutrals more and varying the amount of the primary that I put in, and I had gorgeous ranges from like a raw sienna, yellow ochre, burnt umber, burnt sienna, English red. So really, these three colors are fantastic. I'm betting those are single pigment colors. I wish they had the information on the tube. So if I have anything to say that could influence paint manufacturers out there, is to please disclose the pigments on your tubes so those who want to know can have that information. I think it would lead to many more sales, and people that don't care don't have to read it, obviously, but it's very useful for folks that want to know their paint better. And it's very useful for you as an artist to pay attention to what pigments you like. If you have a red that you love, look at the pigment number, because it might be called, you know, Tulip Red from one company, and it might be called Permanent Rose in another company, and it might be called, you know, something else somewhere else. So if you know your pigments, you'll have a good idea of finding the colors that you like. So the next thing I wanted to do was a little demonstration on their paper, and I thought we might paint some gladiolas. I thought that might be kind of fun, and then take a look at how their brushes perform. So that way you kind of can get the whole feel for the whole line, and then decide, you know, if these paints are suitable for the way you like to paint. Right now you have to get them at an ACMoore store, so if you don't have one near you, you will have to hold tight until they get online ordering up. I think that I would definitely stick to those basic colors that I just showed you, because they mix so well, and that would really teach you a lot about color theory if you're a beginner, and these paints are definitely geared to your beginner painter. I wouldn't mess around with the Hooker's Green Light and the Intense Blue. The Viridian's really nice, actually, if you want to mix that with a little bit of your Cad Yellow Hue there. The Intense Blue is nice. I don't know if I'd mess with the Prussian, because Prussian is known to be kind of fugitive. The Violet's alright, but you can mix a really nice violet with those two colors. I'm not crazy about the Raw Sienna, never crazy about Sepia. Payne's Gray is actually kind of pretty. I'm not crazy about black, but if you like black, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, it's black. And the Yellow Ochre's nice, but the Raw Sienna is a little streaky and inconsistent feeling to me. So yeah, so for my money, it would be sticking with those three primaries, and maybe throwing in the Yellow Ochre and the Viridian. But you know, I didn't have all the browns either. Maybe a burnt umber or a burnt sienna would be a little bit more would be a little bit nicer. I'm not sure, but I mean, for those colors, for those bright ones, I think they're nice. So what we're gonna do is I'm actually gonna grab a fresh plate to do mixing on, because I have a problem. Okay, let me show you this palette, and you tell me what you think in the comments below. I think this is too pretty to wash off. Would anybody else have a problem with just rinsing this off? Because I think it's gorgeous, and I don't want to rinse it off. And I have some Royal Langnickel colors squirted in the center, so I don't want to mix those in with my with my other paints, but I don't want to rinse them off because it's so pretty. The whole thing is so pretty. So I'm going to be mixing on a separate plate so I can, you know, look at those paints for a little while longer until I eventually just wash them away. I'm going to start off with my large round brush. This is a number 8 round. And I think we're going to do some gladiolas. So I usually find like using the biggest brush in a line of brushes to be very telling, because if you can get a really fine crisp line with the biggest brush, you're not going to have any problems with a little brush. So I'm going to start off by taking some of the Viridian. Actually, I'm going to swap these places around so you can see my mixing area. And I am going to grab some of the Cad Yellow Hue and mix myself up a beautiful spring green. Isn't that pretty? It's very lovely, actually. Let's grab some Permanent Rose. Actually, I can pull that whole dollop right over there because it's still wet from the tube. Now, these did dry down on my glass palette. They adhered and they looked glossy, so I think filling up a pan or putting them in a palette to dry, I think you'd be all right. But if you want to be safe, You could add a little bit of honey to them, you know, or glycerin, just add a drop and stir it in. You definitely want to do that with the Royal Langnickel ones because they can tend to crack. But these seem to dry down an awful lot like the cotman paints. I also have a little yellow ochre here. And I think I am just going to wet my brush, pick up some yellow ochre, pick up some of that nice green mix, and I'm going to start by I'm going to press my brush down. We're going to paint a gladiola. I'm going to press my brush down here, lift it up. This paper is really fun to paint on. It's very smooth. Now let's try dropping some color in. That's actually very pretty. I like that. Let's drop some color in. Let's grab a little bit of that intense blue, which is our phthalo blue. Another reason it kind of made me think of the Cotman and the Winsor & Newton colors is because of the name Intense Blue and Intense Green. Those are colors I only seem to hear it called that in like the Winsor & Newton world. Look at that beautiful turquoise you get with those colors mixed together. Let's throw in another one right here. Let those colors flow together. Maybe drip a little bit more in there. Now one thing I can notice is a little bit of scaling, and it's really noticeable when you have a smooth or glossier paper. You can see if a paint has fillers or extenders in there, because those chalks in there, they will just kind of come to the surface, and instead of just kind of hiding around in the texture of the paper, you really see that in a smooth wash. So that's just something to kind of be aware of when you're painting. I'm going to take some yellow ochre. I'm going to put some flowers here now. I'm just going to very loosely kind of block in the base for my gladiolas. They almost kind of look like a lily, but they're not as defined. They're a little bit floopier. And they've got 4 really strong visible petals, and then you might see some other ones kind of in between, but you definitely see 4 fairly clearly. Now I'm going to grab some of this permanent rose, which I really like the permanent rose. That would definitely go into my regular rotation. Well, I really would like to have pigment information before I put something in my regular rotation, actually. So hopefully they get back to me with that, and if they do, I will amend the video description so you can check that out. Now here's where I feel like I wish I had a bigger brush, because I would like to carry a little bit more color. And there's only just so much paint that a smaller synthetic will hold. And this is like your taklon, golden taklon synthetic. Let's try the larger flat brush. This is a number 10 flat. It's about a little bit shy of a 1/2 inch wide. Let's side load it. Let's load it up with yellow ochre and then do the side in our green mix and do a couple like blades of grass. The brushes don't have the best carrying capacity, and it is made a little bit better being on the smooth paper, so it's carrying more on smooth paper because it doesn't have the drag to fight. But if you're on a real textured paper, the line's going to skip just because it's not going to hold that much. Now let's also try the liner here. A liner is a round with long bristles. Let's try that with some blue and just kind of. Oh, the liner's really nice. The liner has good holding capacity. That's definitely one to consider adding to your stash. ACMoore has a lot of nice brushes. I like the Menta series they sell from Royal Langnickel, and for the same amount of money I would go with them over the Onyx. But that's just me, you know, as somebody who's working primarily in watercolor. And in fact, I got one of those right here. Let's use that. This is the Menta. And I can't, like I said, I don't work for them. They just occasionally contact me if they have something new that they think I might want to try. I think that Royal Langnickel might make some of their brushes. Now see, I just find painting with this, being able to grab gobs of color, to be so much more rewarding and satisfying. So yeah, these are the Menta brushes. I really like that. This is a number, what is this? A small? This says SM, which I think might be small medium. Menta watercolor brush. It's a big round. I almost call it like a 16 or something. But I really love the color holding capacity that this brush has. And this is a really loose style. I'm just kind of seeing how the paints react and how they flow. And it's amazing how just changing your brush can give you a whole different opinion on your paints. Like for me now, working with this brush, I'm like, these are fabulous. And not to say anything negative about the Onyx brushes, I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but personally I like a juicier brush, and this definitely is. And I'll just show you here. We'll mix up a little bit more green. I'm going to grab some more of that yellow, cad yellow, a little bit of that intense green. Now let's do a blade of grass here. I mean, like, I can paint for miles. I can make a bunch of different blades. You know, just because this brush is much more absorbent, and this is a completely animal-friendly vegan brush. So, you know, it's synthetic, but it's designed to behave like an animal fur. So kind of keep that in mind. If you want to hold a lot of water, this is going to give you a lot more satisfaction than one of these will, just because the water wants to slide off of that. It doesn't really absorb. This is treated so it will absorb. So just kind of keep that in mind as you're painting. Now let's go into some of these smaller brushes, because I think these would be useful. I am going to take this is a number 2 round. There are some really small ones. I gotta tell you, I think these are gonna go in my gouache supplies. Because I mean, when you have a good watercolor brush, you don't need these tiny ones, because your good ones will come to a fine point. I could definitely see this for using with gouache, or adding white highlights to something, or even, I don't know how well they would hold up to oils, but definitely gouache or acrylics or watercolor crayons, something where you want a shorter bristled, stiffer brush. But for the way I like to paint in watercolors, those brushes are not going to be as useful to me. I feel so diplomatic. I try to be really thorough, because I know there's so many different paints out there and so many different budgets to consider. So the nice thing about this brush is, because it's not holding so much water, I can go on top of these damp flowers, and I can paint the stamens in here. Are they called stamens? I think they are. And just add that design element, and it's not gonna run too much, because I've got a thick kind of pasty paint on a stiff brush. It doesn't hold, not really stiff, but it's about it's a golden taklon brush. It's not gonna hold a bunch of water and mess things up for me. So there's another reason to, have a variety. Now if I go in here with my permanent rose again, which I really like that color, I can go in, I can add some detail, some shape to some of these petals that have gotten a little mushy. And as long as I don't have more water on my brush than I do on my paper, I can work back into the damp without it feathering too badly, without it running all over the place. And add some nice gestury lines there. So playing with how wet your paper is another thing you can do as an artist, to just get a little bit more variety of edges and whatnot. And I think that's really all I wanted to show you today. Whoops, I shouldn't have put that right on that brown. But I think that the paints are decent. I don't know if they're the best value at full price, but I do know their stuff goes on sale all the time. So I think if you see it for like, 4 for $10, give them a try. I would highly recommend that you pick up the permanent rose, the cad yellow hue, and the intense blue, because those will give you really great mixes. If you're buying this for a child who's beginning, or a friend who's just getting into watercolors, do them a favor and give them fewer colors and then maybe a nice palette. Or like I use these plates from the Dollar Tree, these squarish white plates from the Dollar Tree. They're fabulous because you can mix so much here. Add a yellow ochre maybe. I haven't tried their sap green, so I don't know, but I mean, these 3 colors are going to give you a lot of versatility, and hopefully that will help you out. So I will put more information in the video description. I'll put information on my website and give you another few peeks at the other stuff that I prepared. I would say I would say if they go on sale, they're a great value. I think they might be a little bit high at $4 a tube when you've got Cotman, Grumbacher, Academy, and Van Gogh for that price. I think those paints might be a touch higher in quality. And especially since they have pigment information, which is a huge deal, whether they have pigment information or not. And I would always, you know, if you're spending the same amount of money, I'd always go with a paint with the pigment information because it tells me what's actually in there. Guess what I forgot to do? I forgot to compare the big swatch of Cotmans I have against this swatch that I did on my regular swatching paper. So let's take a look at, these are the Cotman pans, and this is the Premier tubes, but I had mentioned, like in this swatch here, that I thought that the Premier and the Cotman acted a lot the same. So these would be the Premiers. Those are the Cotman tubes I had out, but I also wanted to compare these swatches against the Cotman pan colors that I had. So what I'm actually going to do is cut this swatch apart so I'll be able to like line them up close to the swatches I have in my book, and then we can do another comparison because I think they're going to be pretty similar. So if you like Cotman, these might be another good option for you. So let's first look for permanent rose. It's really hard for me to see. So that almost seems a little cooler. The Cotman seems a little bit cooler, but pretty close. This was really close to the tube permanent rose right there from Cotman. Let's see, Cad Yellow hue right there. Very close. I'm sorry it's taking me a while to zoom in with my eyeballs and read it. Let's see, this is Cad Red hue, very similar, almost the same. Yellow Ochre is right there. I had swatched that a little thicker, but the hue seems about the same. This is the Raw Sienna. Now look at that, the Raw Sienna, they both have that kind of texture to them, which I thought was really interesting. Hooker's Green Light. Let's see, it's Hooker's Green Dark. Oh, that's Hooker's Green Light right there. So this one looks a little bit lighter, but it might just be the way I painted it. So let's compare it to, this is also Hooker's Green Light. Boy, that's pretty close. That seems a little more yellow to me. Intense Green is right there. Very similar to the Intense Green there. Viridian Hue right there. Very close, even in texture. I'm wondering if they might have the same, maybe hired the same factory to make the paints for this. Of course, I can't say that definitively. That's just an observation and nothing for sure. Now that's Intense Blue from Cotman. This does not. This looks greener. It looks much more like the turquoise from Cotman. Prussian Blue right there. Quite similar. This Prussian almost looks a little more green to me, but this could have shifted because I swatched this a couple of years ago, but it has been dark, so I wouldn't think it would have changed. We have Dioxazine Violet, or Dioxazine Purple, which is right there, which is pretty darn close. And this is the other swatch of that. Pretty close, but I don't know if I'd call it an exact match. Raw Umber, do I have that one? Oh yeah, look at that. Weak as can be. Very similar to this one. Sepia. Boy, these are awfully close matches, guys. Payne's Gray. Again, a very close match. That's Ivory Black and that's Lamp Black. Pretty close. I think I must have painted out a little bit more thicker. Now again, these were pans and these were all from tubes. Gosh, these are very close to the Cotman watercolors. So I would say if you like the Cotman watercolors, these go on sale, you want to save yourself a few bucks and try these instead. I would say they're very similar. So I just wanted to make sure I came back and showed you that. I'd forgotten the original taping, and if there's a weird awkward ending here, that's why. It's because I forgot. You guys didn't remember me. You were supposed to say, hey Lindsay, show us the big swatch of your Cotmans, lady. So shame on you. Just kidding. Thank you so much for watching. Again, give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this in-depth review. I sure do enjoy bringing them to you. It's so much fun to see how different paints compare with one another because I'm a big nerd. And that's all I have for today. If you want to see some more reviews, make sure you click on the cards on your screen and check them out. I have a lot of reviews on my channel because they're so much fun to make, and hopefully they'll save you a few bucks and keep you from buying something that's not going to suit your needs, or maybe encourage you to get something that will. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.